Funerals are a time of great grief and sorrow. They can also be very expensive. Tonight on The Best Times, we explore the many options offered by the funeral industry and give you consumer advice on ways to control the cost of dying. Funding for The Best Times is provided by the Plow Foundation, striving to do the greatest good by helping the greatest number of people since 1964. Additional funding is provided by the members of WKNO. Thank you. Hello, I'm Chris Hardaway. Welcome to this edition of The Best Times, a series that looks at life after 50. No one likes to talk about dying, certainly not our own death. But of course, the only time we can plan for death is while we're still alive. The funeral business is a multi-billion-dollar industry. For many people, the first time they're faced with making funeral arrangements is the death of a loved one. At a time of grief and stress, it can be very overwhelming to plan a funeral. Tonight on The Best Times, we talk with a consumer advocate about the cost of dying. In the United States, funerals are big business. It's estimated that the industry's annual revenue is somewhere between $16 and $20 billion. Nationally, the median cost of a typical funeral, with a viewing and burial in a vault, is well over $8,000. The baby boom generation is leading a trend toward cremation. In 2015, for the first time, the percentage of cremations surpassed the choice of traditional burials, a trend that is expected to continue in the future. Much of the reason for the rise in cremations is cost. Nationally, the median cost of a funeral service with cremation is over $2,000 less than a traditional burial. No one likes to talk about death or how much it costs, but arming yourself with some consumer advice can ease your stress during a time of grief. To find out more about the cost of dying, I spoke with Furniss Hartness, president of the Funeral Consumers Alliance of the Mid-South. I think for most people, the first time they are confronted with having to plan a funeral is when a loved one dies. And in the midst of their grief, I think it's easy for them to be overwhelmed by all the choices that they have. So how do you make the choices easier?
Well, you are exactly correct when you say that you are overwhelmed, because when someone dies that you're very close to, you're in a state of shock. You have a few days to plan what will be a major expenditure in your life, and Funeral Consumers Alliance provides a price survey that you can go to and look, and that is where you begin. And we urge people to shop around, and we urge you to do that before someone that you love dies, so that you have some preparedness for this and have some awareness of the issues of what will be probably, for many people, one of the major expenditures of their lives.
So educate yourself.
Yes, sir.
Number one, educate yourself. All right,
Correct.
And then use that and shop around.
Yes, sir.
All right, we'll talk about shopping a little more in a minute, but you mentioned the cost. What's the average cost here in the state of Tennessee for a funeral? Traditional funeral where it's burial in the ground.
The cost for the funeral home part of it alone, our anecdotal study here locally suggests it's between $8,000 and $10,000.
$8,000 and $10,000.
Yes, sir.
And what does that not include?
Does not include the plot at the cemetery, does not include the vault, does not include the opening and closing at the cemetery, does not include the marker, does not include the setting of the marker. And all of those things, depending upon where you go, can be extravagantly expensive.
So we're talking about even an average funeral that could be $15,000 to $20,000.
Yes, sir.
For an average traditional funeral.
Yes, sir. In my own case, I'll tell you, my mother was interred at a family cemetery in Collinston, Louisiana. They would have charged me nothing for the grave, but I paid $300. I had to pay $500 for the vault. I had to pay another $500 for the stone. I had to pay another, roughly, let's say, $50 for the setting of it. So you're looking at, what, $1,500 more? Mm-hmm. Now, that is the least expensive thing that you could come across. Now, out here, the least expensive cemetery plot you're going to find is around between $1,000 and $1,200, depending. Opening and closing is going to be at such a cemetery between $1,000 and $1,500. You're looking at there over $2,000. Now, that's before you touch a marker. The least expensive marker I know currently is going to be about $500 to $600, and that's just a simple individual marker. So you're looking at another, what, $2,600, somewhere along in there. If you have a vault, $500 more, and that's the least expensive thing you can find here locally.
Dying can be very expensive.
Dying is very expensive. In fact, that was the title of a Bureau of Labor Statistics analysis that was done, which showed inflation in this industry to be at least double over the period 1986 to 2017 than what all other commodities are that are in the United States of America. In the casket alone part of it, as we discussed, the inflation rate over that period of time, 86 to 2017, was 230%. So dying, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is a very, very expensive project.
Let's talk about some myths. First of all, there's no law that requires the use of a funeral home, correct?
That's correct.
So what does that mean? What does that in term give you options to do?
Well, there is no such law, but in practical reality, you don't really have a lot of options, because most cemeteries that are local, that are commercial, and then that's the bulk of them, are tied to funeral homes. And therefore, you may not have to, by law, use a funeral home, but the practical matter is you're not going to get any cooperation if you sought to undertake this on your own.
And you're buying a service.
Yes, sir.
You're buying a service.
And you're buying entree with that service to the cemetery. If you had a church cemetery, let's say, that would work with you, you would not have to have the use of a funeral home. You could do what's called a natural or a green burial, casket to body, you have the death certificate given to you, and then work with it from there. And people locally have done that, but it is very difficult to do. We at Funeral Consumers Alliance in the Mid-South would like to see it be made easier and simpler and more clear.
More cost-effective.
Yes, sir, but that involves changing a whole lot. That's very difficult to change.
Embalming. Embalming is not required by law here in this state,
no,
right?
Sir, it is not.
And it varies from state to state, I guess.
Yes, sir.
But it's not necessarily a requirement.
It is not a requirement. There's no law that says you have to be embalmed in the state of Tennessee. We've had people call. We get phone calls fielded from our website, and we get phone calls saying that, well, I went to have my husband cremated, and they told me that by state law he had to be embalmed before he was cremated. That is not true. Now, some funeral homes have a policy that if you're going to have a viewing at that funeral home, and they are entitled to have that, then you must have the body embalmed, and that would also include viewing the body prior to cremating the body, which a lot of funeral homes today do. Yeah. So,
burial
other
vaults.
than that, sir.
Burial vaults.
Yes, sir.
Not required by law.
Not required by law. What you run into there is the state of Tennessee cedes to cemeteries the prerogative to establish their own regulations. In that process, the individual cemetery, and all of them do, other than two that I know of here locally, they may require a vault. And so if that's so, and you have a plot, you have to purchase the vault.
And vault price, I think you quoted a price earlier, range.
But, locally, but my mother's in Louisiana at the time was $500 for a very simple vault. I'm uncertain as to what those run now. But I would say that just guessing, you're looking at somewhere between $700 and $1,100 roughly for the vault. depending on what you get now. You can get elaborate vaults like you can get elaborate caskets.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I mean, the cost of a funeral can be whatever you want to spend on it.
Whatever you. We've had people go to do pre-planning at various funeral homes here, and by the time they got through with the funeral portion of it alone, before they touched the cemetery, you're looking at $15,000, and that figure comes from 7-8 years ago.
Well, let's talk about something that is a bit more cost-effective: cremation, which is growing rapidly, right?
Yes, sir.
Talk about cremation, why it is growing, and why it's cost-effective.
A couple of reasons. The cremation is a very simple process, and it is also, depending on where you go, an inexpensive process. There's a crisis in Europe in terms of available graves, and in a lot of places where there's very little land, there's such a crisis. In Hong Kong, for instance, at Victoria Peak, you can be buried for 6 years, after which you are disinterred and the grave is used by somebody else, your bones placed in an ossuary and put in and housed somewhere. We have not gone to that here. In Russia, there are places that have gone to that. In Europe, cremations went way up, causing the Pope John Paul II, to authorize cremations for the Roman Catholic population. And with that, though, the Roman Catholics had to be buried in consecrated ground, and officially by a church official. That has spread to here in terms of legitimating this. And when you look at an $8,000 to $10,000 figure for what would amount to the average cost of just the funeral home part of a funeral, you can get here locally, if you shop around, you can get a cremation for between $800 and $900, and that's with the body picked up, the body cremated, and delivered to you in a box. Now, that same process can cost you $5,000 if you go to one of the more expensive funeral homes here, but you can get it at that cost. And then you, if you're not Roman Catholic or part of a religious organization, you can do with those ashes however your religious traditions may dictate. So that simplifies matters a great deal. And the cost in particular, what drives that here more than any other thing is an $8,000 to $10,000 least expensive average cost is one that is very difficult for most people to bear. And when you look at $800 to $900, I mean, there's just no comparison. Yeah. And again, the $8,000 to $10,000 is before you touch the cemetery portion of it.
Yes, yes.
So, and churches, let me say, have caught on to this, and they are establishing columbaria in their buildings, and that enables their members to, let's say, pay $500 for a spot in the columbarium, and then go and have the body cremated for $800 to $900, and you're looking at a total figure of less than $1,500 for the whole of a memorial service or a funeral.
What is the role of the funeral director?
Well, that's a good question. It's become in many respects, a quasi-religious role. He has got access to the funeral home and to all of the various functions that it performs, from preparing the body to casketing the body to delivering the body. And so, as a rule, the funeral director coordinates all of that and interfaces with, let's say, the religious body that the person is an adherent of, and then coordinates the whole picture so that you arrive at the cemetery for the interment.
Right. But at the same time, they're salespeople, right?
They are, yes, sir. And that was going to be my point. They are salespeople, and we have to understand that what's come to be known as a proper funeral, many people are convinced that's a religious obligation. It's not. What you have to understand about the funeral director is that he works for a company. The company is a for-profit entity, and he or she is in the business, frankly, of selling and making money. And that is a different agenda than one you may have, and especially if you are wounded or hurt or grieved is maybe the better word, because you've lost someone near and dear to you.
So from a consumer standpoint, know that that funeral director sitting across from you is a salesperson.
Yes,
and they're
sir.
trying to sell you something.
Yes, sir.
And so
That changes the picture.
know
That
what you're
changes the
buying.
environment entirely.
Yes.
If you
Yeah.
understand that.
Yeah.
And if you understand that the things that may cost more, these things are not incumbent upon you to purchase to show love, respect, admiration, religious devotion.
Yeah. And be sure to ask for an itemized
Yes, sir.
cost
Yes,
of
sir.
everything. Let's talk about pre-need funeral plans, because I'm of the age where I get mailings all the time from funeral homes telling me that I need to pre-plan my funeral. What is a pre-planning of your funeral? Is it a good idea? Should I prepay for it?
When you use the term pre-planning can occur without prepaying. You're led to believe oftentimes that with pre-planning there must be prepaying. That's not so. You can write your wishes down, you can establish a bank account, you can charge someone with carrying out the details of your funeral once you are gone by using the money in your bank account to go and purchase whatever goods and services that you have enumerated you would desire at your funeral. Prepaying, on the other hand, means that you're going to purchase ahead of time these things. We strongly encourage you not to do that.
Why?
We encourage you not to do that because there's been such trouble in the industry with doing that. And I say that because Consumer Reports, American Association of Retired Persons, the Kiplinger Report, I can go down the list, all say the same thing. Their studies indicate that the industry is not sufficiently regulated and inspected to ensure that, let's say if I purchase something for $15,000, the inflation in the industry is huge, that I will be able to have what I purchased 20, 30 years down the road because this inflation is so strong. Not only that, here locally we've had individual funeral homes sell pre-needs policies, and then these funeral homes go out of business. One that did that, people had paid, me thousands of dollars. They got $100 on the policy back. If you move and you've purchased a policy at a local funeral home, then when you move, what do you do? Because it's not, now the Dignity program in terms of the corporations that share in that has said if you purchase one here, we're going to solve that problem, and you go here, it's still good. All right. And that is one answer. But as a rule, we've had games played wherein people purchase a policy and then you go in to liquidate the policy and they say, well, this casket is not the one that was in that policy and you're going to have to pay more. Mm-hmm. Well, the Funeral and Embalmers Board here locally says if that happens to you here in the state of Tennessee, all right, then the law of the state of Tennessee says that the company that sold you the pre-needs policy must give you, if that one's not available, an equal casket, and if they have to give you a casket of lesser value, they must refund the amount of money that's allotted for the casket in your policy.
So what I'm hearing from you is read the fine print carefully before you hand over the check.
Well, the fine print, sometimes, yes, sir, we would say that, but the fine print is sometimes difficult to understand. It's written vaguely. For instance, I'm the minister of a church. We had recently a lady in my church that about 3 months ago who died. She was laboring under the impression that she had purchased an opening and closing with the burial policy that she had purchased, all right? And because we have a church cemetery, all right, she owned the plot, she had the stone, the opening and closing was included from the funeral home. Well, turns out that if you read this carefully, it could be construed, was not clear, but it could be construed to mean that only $300, which was paid in 1986, was applied toward the total cost, which was going to be $900, and they wanted $600 more from the family. So when you start trying to read the fine print, my wife's an attorney, and sometimes that can be difficult to do. And remember, in all the fine print arguments, the only one that can give finality to this, frankly, is a judge. Yeah. And for you to get into that arena is simply cost prohibitive. It's not worth doing when you're looking at the amount of money involved.
Yeah. We've talked about the traditional in-ground burial. We've talked about cremations, but there are some alternatives, a couple of alternatives. So talk about those.
The alternatives of which you speak, I think, are what's called natural or green burial, which is an old-fashioned burial. Unfortunately, here locally, unless you go to a private church or other family cemetery, that's just not available.
Not available to
Meaning, because what's at issue here is either casketing an unembalmed or shrouding an unembalmed body and burying the body unvaulted. Only 2 cemeteries here locally that I know of will permit that. One's public and one is the Veterans Cemetery. Well, I'll just tell you what the public did. Elmwood Cemetery will permit that, and their history is that. West Tennessee Veterans does it because of religious reasons. Other than that, pretty much a vault is required, and in particular in all of the commercial cemeteries, and they can require a type of casket if they so desire, because the state cedes to the cemetery the authority to make its own regulations.
Sounds like green burial could be a cost-effective alternative, but it's difficult.
Green burial would cost you less than $2,500 for the whole of the funeral home part of it. And we get calls asking for advice, and the question we are getting more and more frequently is, where can I avail myself of a green or a natural burial? Remember, all of these that was a predominant form of burial prior to about 1930, somewhere along in there.
And the second form of alternative burial is, or disposal of the remains.
Disposition of the remains, yes, sir.
Is whole body donation.
Yes, sir. And that can happen at Genesis, at Mary, which is a fabulous program that involves donating your body so that doctors who present proposals about techniques that they're trying to field and they want to train doctors are able to go and do these techniques on cadavers prior to actually doing them on live people, so that the mistakes are made on the cadaver, and then Mary, Genesis, cremates your body, and they will either inter it for you or they will give you the cremains sometime after the cremation has occurred. The second option, of course, is the University of Tennessee Cadavers for the Education of Medical Students. Both of those are fabulous programs, and you can look and find out exactly how to do that by visiting websites or calling the phone numbers associated with those institutions.
And very cost effective too.
Yes, sir. Very cost effective in that Genesis, again, I'm going from information that's a little old here. You can find out exact. Genesis, the whole of this, if they accept your body, if they accept you into that program, is no cost to you. And the cremated remains are returned to you, and there is no further cost. Or they will inter them and have a memorial service for you following. And with the University of Tennessee, the same, I think, is true there. But I'm not as familiar with the recent regulations of the University of Tennessee.
Well, to close out, give me your best advice for a consumer when it comes time, when that moment arrives where you have to plan the funeral.
Well, what you said, perhaps starting off, is that to understand that this is a business for funeral homes and for commercial cemeteries. You are involved in a business transaction, and you need to approach this on that basis. In all other business transactions that I know of, you would shop around. You'd take a look at cost variations, at quality. You'd look at evaluations wherever you could find them. And then you would approach the subject based on that, and you would do that prior to its occurrence. Because if you wait until you are confronted with this massive industry and its really overarching presence in this area of death, then you're going to be vulnerable, because when you lose somebody, people tell me, well, I was ready, so-and-so had cancer for 3 years and I'm totally ready. You're really not. When that final moment and the reality of death comes, you're wounded and you're vulnerable. And if you've done no preparation up to that point, you go in and you face all of this, and you're subject to emotional manipulation, which is what you're trying to avoid. You want to get what is reasonable and what you can afford for the person that you love in order to appropriately honor and celebrate their life.
Well, thank you very much for that consumer advice about funerals.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you for having me on your program.
For more consumer information about funerals, visit the website of the Funeral Consumers Alliance of the Mid-South. Want more information about life after 50? Go online to watch more shows and find more resources. And send us your feedback and story ideas to besttimes@wkno.org. That's all for this edition of The Best Times. Please join us next week for more stories about life after 50. Until then, I'm Chris Hardaway. Thanks for watching. Good night. Funding for The Best Times is provided by the Plow Foundation, striving to do the greatest good by helping the greatest number of people since 1964. Additional funding is provided by the members of WKNO. Thank you.